Hello there, I'm George Hall, and welcome back to the Good Growth Podcast. Now, no matter what day, week, month, year, decade, or, well, even century, there will always be fashion. Fashion brands strive to be at the forefront of consumer consciousness, whilst maintaining credibility and esteem. But now, more than ever, they need to juggle things like technology, sustainability, and future-proofing. I'm joined today by Sarah Auerbach and Sophie Lawrence-Teal. Sarah is a consultant director here at Good Growth, and her background in fashion, cosmetics, events and communications means she'll hopefully have some great insights to share with you all. Sophie is Good Growth's strategy director with a background in influencer marketing, social media and creative communications. Both, it's great to have you on the show. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Nice to be on it, George. Thanks a lot for the invite.
Good, thank you, George.
Excellent. Well, look, we're here to talk fashion. We're here to talk big brands, big ideas. This whole conversation was sparked internally by the publication of the Lyst Index, which, for anyone wondering, is a quarterly ranking of fashion's hottest brands and products. So the formula behind the Lyst Index takes into account things like shopper behaviour, searches, product views, sales, and also incorporates media mentions, activity and engagement statistics worldwide over a 3-month period. So it's Q4 2022 that's the latest version. Keen to get both of your thoughts on things in terms of, would you say this is as expected? I mean, Prada takes the top spot and the top 20 is full of big names. Are there any surprises in the list, or is it as expected?
Well, so I think it's certainly been a stellar quarter for Italian brands. And you see them dominate the top 10. Particularly, you've got Prada, you've got Gucci, Moncler, Miu Miu, and Valentino. They're all the top 5. I think the names that really excited me the most are the newer entries, the breakout brands. You've got Alaïa and you've got Mugler featuring. And what's interesting is how they are really fueled by Gen Z and millennials' interest in your archive Y2K fashion. So those are the two I think that impressed me the most.
It's really interesting that you say that, Sarah, because I'm certainly not a fashionista myself. But what I thought was really interesting, what I picked up on the index were the presence of cultural references. So like Diesel, for example, is kind of moved up the list or is present in the list because it went viral on TikTok for the belt skirt. But the fact that the belt skirt is completely useless. And similarly, Dolce & Gabbana get a mention because Jennifer Coolidge wore, one of their pieces in White Lotus. So for me, I think that's especially from my background, I think that's really, really interesting because it's almost, sometimes you think of these luxury brands and you don't necessarily think they're particularly accessible, but it feels like they're more and more kind of weaving into popular culture, which I think is fascinating. And I did see a lot of those TikTok videos.
It definitely popped up on my For You page quite a few times. There's obviously a lot of impressive work that's gone into these brands that are on the Lyst Index for Q4 2022. Sarah, you mentioned a couple there in terms of things that have impressed you. What is it specifically that strikes you as extremely impressive? I mean, is it the tech? Is it the crossovers? Keen to get your thoughts on what are the really standout bits.
Well, actually, and Sophie, you mentioned it really well as well. What's so interesting about the Lyst Index is that they don't just look at sales, but they actually look at social mentions and actually look at the sort of the views of brands to include them, to know whether to include them into the index. And certainly with Alaïa, I mean, you've got Jenny Ortega who wore that stunning Alaïa dress as Wednesday Addams, and that went into a viral dance that generated, I don't know how many billions of views on TikTok. And with Mugler, obviously, the brand returned to Paris Fashion Week after I think what was a 2-year hiatus. It's been worn by Dua Lipa, it's been worn by Addison Rae, and actually it was really poignant given the fact that Thierry Mugler died last year. So you've got those two brands I thought were particularly interesting because they were your sort of breakout brands. Then you've obviously got Gucci, who, Gucci have understood they're absolutely leading the way when it comes to communicating with the new luxury customer.
They got the brief, didn't they?
They got the brief. I mean, they really did. I think they're the first real established luxury brand to build a digital world in the metaverse. You've got the Gucci Vaultland, which I think launched in November. And then they're an early adopter of Web3 technology. They were the first luxury brand to launch an NFT. They've obviously created Gucci Garden, which is an immersive experience in Roblox. And you're right, they've totally captured the zeitgeist. They totally understand what the luxury consumer of today is looking for and needs.
And Sophie, any from you that particularly grabbed your attention as innovative or seriously impressive?
I think, well, I'm a big Gucci fan. Just because of how they operate and how they kind of tap into youth culture. And I feel like it's the element of surprise. They always do something unexpected. I think they did like a launch party for their Adidas collaboration in Bethnal Green Working Men's Club, which is pretty niche, really, unless you live in East London. So I think things like that, and like I said, just tapping into that culture. I think what's interesting, maybe it's just because we've looked at this particular index, but there doesn't seem to be a huge amount about sustainability on there. It is more kind of about the popular culture references, like Adele wearing things in music videos and, the Jenny Ortega and things like that. So it would be interesting to know if that also is something that's kind of, as you mentioned before at the beginning of the podcast, something that's on the agenda of these huge luxury brands. But no, mainly it's about that accessibility. And I think I'm certainly not Gen Z. I can just about still call myself a millennial, I think. But I really love this kind of, like, I don't remember luxury brands being particularly interesting to me or particularly accessible. Whereas it seems now I sound old, but it seems now that a lot of these brands are being shaped by youth culture. And I think that's phenomenal. Like, because you think about Gucci and you'd think, okay, it might be something, like a dodgy replica that your auntie would get you from a holiday in Turkey, or it's something that, your mum buys, or it's always been like quite unattainable. Whereas now I think, to Sarah's point, the fact that they've got the vault and they're experimenting, I feel like they're really tuned in to the customer, and they, the customer that is growing up to be the luxury shopper. I think that's why these people, why these particular brands are in this index, which, to me is really, really fascinating.
Now, there's quite a lot of buzzwords in the description for the list index. Things like, Web3, NFT, which, maybe are buzzwords, but they are real trends, obviously real things that are important to the fashion industry and fashion retailers. We've mentioned a few trends already, but I'm keen to get from you guys whether you think there's any trends that you see emerging over the rest of 2023. And I'm not talking whether monochrome and stripes are going to come back in for fall. But how do you see the rest of the year playing out in terms of what's going to be the big things that stand out for fashion retailers and brands?
I think when it comes to the metaverse and the hugely kind of hyped up, everyone kind of has a different definition, and you read certain reports. I was reading this morning that actually it's likely to be like 10 years until it actually reaches mainstream. So I think those that are going to kind of future proof, and I think the good trends that we're going to see is kind of like a Gucci, where it's sort of, the metaverse and Roblox and Web3 features and all of these amazing kind of tools, if you like, that creative designers and fashion houses have at their fingertips to kind of create that expression. I think it's about keeping a balance. It's to enhance the human experience and to enhance that creativity rather than sort of replace it. But I also think, like I said, it's really fascinating to see brands that are really tapping into that. I read this ridiculous stat that I think, well, it's actually not ridiculous at all. It makes sense. It's just a lot of money. But something like $54 billion are spent on virtual goods every year in the US. And that's more than is actually spent on music, which I felt quite sad about, but maybe I'm just old again. That's a humongous amount of money. So I think brands and, luxury brands and fashion houses that are really tapping into that customer zeitgeist, to quote Sarah, I think are definitely going to be the ones that lead the way. And it's less about trying to create trends, but really sort of leaning in and really sort of providing that platform, because ultimately that's what fashion's about, isn't it? It's letting people express themselves, and increasingly you've got Gen Z and Gen Alpha and Gen whoever else, that don't want to conform to demographics, and they don't want to be put in a particular bucket. So you can create a virtual reality version of yourself, and you can be as tall as you like and be whatever gender or not that you want to be. That I think is really fascinating, and that is what, from my perspective, I think will mean that these brands sort of stand the test of time. So I'm excited to see how more of them kind of venture in.
Really lovely what you said there about enhancing the human experience by allowing expression through things like fashion. That is an extremely important thing. Sarah, any of your thoughts on trends for the next year?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Sophie. I think it's a really exciting time for luxury fashion. And I actually, the biggest trend we're witnessing is that growth in the luxury market is being driven by millennials and Gen Z. So what we're now seeing is how luxury brands are really having to redefine luxury so that they can appeal to this next generation of customer. Because obviously, before, luxury was very much about impeccable craftsmanship, incredible service. That's now just a given. That's not enough. And so these luxury brands are having to place their consumers and that community at the very center of what they do, because they got to drive these meaningful connections and ultimately sales. And what's particularly interesting is you can see how that major theme has given rise to other themes, which very much you can see those within the top 20 brands that are in the list index. So you've got the sub theme of that ability of combining heritage and innovation using social commerce. So the likes of Gucci and etc., who are really using Web3 technology. You've got the use of really high profile collaborations that Sophie alluded to. I think you have got to focus on sustainability and then the importance of community as well. So I think it'd be really interesting to see how those themes develop over the next few years.
Okay. And it's interesting you picked up on sustainability there. I mean, Sarah, you and I have spoken on the podcast before about sustainability and its importance. There are a number of references to sustainability and sustainable themes and ideas on the list index for Q4. Things like, Balenciaga being recognised by PETA for the use of mycelium-based leather. But those references are sort of outnumbered and overshadowed, really, by references to NFTs, Web3, to the latest developments in tech. I'm keen to get both of your opinions, really, on whether sustainability is a genuine concern for fashion brands or whether it is now becoming a bit of a marketing ploy, a bit of a case of consumers have so much choice. We know that Gen Z and millennials are environmentally conscious, so let's try and be the most sustainable brand because it'll make us money, rather than let's be the most sustainable brand because we should be. It's our duty.
So I think it's a genuine care. Luxury products have always been considered more sustainable than the fast fashion counterparts. I mean, obviously in the way they're made and the fact that product shelf life, you're usually going to keep a luxury product for longer. But luxury brands that are pushing sustainability higher up their agenda. And again, it's due to the new consumer demand. Sustainable retail is super important for Gen Z, certainly for Gen Alpha that's coming up the ranks, and also millennials. And these generations demand absolute complete transparency from what they're buying. And there are luxury brands leading the way. I mean, you've got luxury fashion heavyweights, LVMH, Prada, and Richemont. They've obviously formed the Aura blockchain consortium, and they're using blockchain. They're investing in those blockchain technology to not only increase the sort of their transparency and their honesty and their authenticity with their new consumers, but also it enables them as a brand to protect against counterfeiters and actually enable the circular economy. So the whole sustainability angle is really important to luxury fashion, and we'll see more brands invest in that and do more as the years go by.
No, I think that's a really good point. I think the key word is transparency. I think consumers you have information at your fingertips, and a lot, I think people do try, and particularly with the luxury, I think people do try and make more of a conscious effort to be responsible with their shopping. But yeah, I think that transparency is really key. The supply chain, where's my product come from? And I'm also really fascinated in the rise of re-commerce and what that is said to be worth or kind of valued at a global level. It's certainly in the billions over the next few years, and how different fashion brands, not just luxury, but in general, can kind of set themselves up, because it's a slightly different kind of consumer mentality. It's that sort of circle process, if you like. But yeah, I think that's a big effort to kind of be more sustainable. It's potentially just, it's less obvious, but it's about being more innovative and working with what you've got and creating kind of those marketplaces, I suppose, as opposed to kind of, we've planted 5 trees for this pair of lovely slippers that you're buying. But no, I think the transparency is key. And I think re-commerce is really, really interesting, particularly if you think about that kind of, again, the younger generation, this sort of like hustle culture and that kind of desirability. I mean, the short Ugg boot that literally was so high in demand, I think it was at one point sold out in like 80% of all Ugg stores online, or something ridiculous, which fills me with horror, because I wore Ugg boots like the first time around. But the fact that there's the consumer and the customer is such a huge, like such a powerful force, that I think by recognizing that, giving people the ability to trade products, upsell products, or swap them for something else, I think is what makes re-commerce and kind of the sustainability conversation really interesting.
And it's worked wonders for the sneaker and trainer industry as well, hasn't it? I mean, Sarah, you and I spoke pre-Christmas about Nike and their move to zero, and how you can take old shoes back into store and have them repurposed or recycled or donated. And it's something that particularly appeals to young people, isn't it?
And I think also there was a concern, some luxury brands were probably a little bit fearful that if they even thought about introducing re-commerce, and there'd be the real threat of cannibalizing sales of their own products. But actually what they're doing is they're appealing to a younger and more environmentally conscious consumer. They're being more sustainable. They're adding new revenue streams to their business operations. And actually, people who sell their luxury goods are probably just going to buy something new with the money that they get from it. So it really is it's a circular economy. So it's something that more luxury brands are going to be buying into. And I think at the moment, a lot of the luxury brands are relying on third-party operations to run their re-commerce. I think we'll see more luxury brands actually running their own re-commerce online. Okay.
Well, something we've spoken about all the way through this episode has been the importance of Gen Z consumers, of millennial consumers. I mean, look, even as a Gen Z myself, I'm not sure how I'd go about targeting the age group. I mean, it's so broad. There is so much expression, as we've already previously alluded to. Obviously, they're going to be extremely important in the coming years for fashion brands. I mean, we see news reports and articles about how younger consumers are less likely to invest in housing and rent because they're being outpriced. So they're more likely to invest in things like luxury goods because they have a higher resale value. People are living with their parents for longer. They're not flying the nest. How do brands go about targeting those Gen Z consumers? What does the future look like? I mean, is it a case of jumping on the latest hype train with the metaverse or whatever gaming platform is popular? Or is there something deeper and more strategic that can be done?
Gen Z and millennials, it does present a whole set of challenges, new challenges for luxury brands, but also a whole set of new opportunities. And really, I think the key one is how do luxury brands make their brand history and their tradition relevant to that young consumer? So again, going back to Gucci, if you're a successful luxury brand, you're the one that's going to really embrace that innovation to create a very modern omnichannel experience. And LVMH did it recently, where they created an experience where you could learn about the history of the brand, collect NFTs and use them online. So it's the fact that you have to adapt. You have to be where the new generation is, but you have to be exceptionally honest and transparent. Luxury has to be authentic. It has to show integrity in all its initiatives, from whether it's, high profile collaborations to sustainability. And Gen Z and millennial consumers will get behind a brand when it goes right, but they will absolutely come down on a brand, double down on a brand very, very quickly when it goes wrong and when it doesn't feel authentic. And we've seen that happen recently as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think for me, it's about being present, and it's about less about using Gen Z, Gen Alpha as a marketing tactic, and more about kind of investing, kind of putting your money where your mouth is. So again, I feel like if you counted how many times Gucci had been mentioned on this podcast, but again, it just, it's Gucci. They introduced, I think it was in 2017 now, but they introduced like a shadow millennial committee, where they had young people that came in and they met with, senior teams at Gucci and became part of the process, like part of the creative process. So again, I think it's just about being present and being proactive, and just kind of being tuned in, I think. And just this continuing of this kind of democratization of luxury and what that means, I think, is really awesome and really, really exciting.
Perfect. And then I'll end, if I may, on one of the hardest types of questions you can ask, really, which is, can you sum up in maybe one sentence, maybe a little bit more if you need it, sum up what does 2023 look like for fashion brands? What does the year ahead hold? What trends are you expecting to see? I'm wary that's way more than one sentence's worth of questioning. But what are your thoughts for the year ahead? And I'll take abject silence as a sign that maybe that is quite a tricky question.
That's a good question. I think that's the quietest Sarah and I have ever been on a call together. So you get points for that, George. I think I'm both fascinated and horrified by the kind of Y2K and the trends coming back around, like the belt skirt and like the Ugg boots. And I think that's really interesting. It either shows my age, or it just, it shows that the cycle of fashion and people expressing themselves. I think that's really interesting. And it's definitely, I don't think it's a trend, because again, I'm not a fashionista as such, but as a creative person, I'm really interested in how fashion houses and luxury brands will continue to embrace people like Julia Fox, who just have, Marmite. You either think she's awesome or completely insane. So I'm interested to see how that goes. And Pharrell Williams joining as a new creative director, different things like that. I think I'm really interested in how pop culture continues to inform fashion, and the cycle of that, and just the opportunities to be creative. All the different technologies, social commerce, all the different ways of building communities. I think it's really fascinating and really exciting. Belt skirts aside, of course.
Brilliant. And then Sarah, over to you. Keen to get your thoughts on the year ahead.
Yeah, so it's a really tough one, but I think for me, if I had to summarize it in 3 words, it would be breaking down barriers. And I think breaking down barriers covers many different aspects, from breaking down barriers in materials, in the operational processes, in marketing, in the people who work in luxury, to, the way it's sold. And luxury is really leading the way here. And I don't think we've seen everything yet. So I'm really excited about what's to come.
Perfect. Well, I think that just about does us for today. It's been fascinating to talk to you both on what's been a very, very large number of trends and ideas and themes. And it's given us plenty of ideas, I'm sure, for future episodes. We've only just touched on things like re-commerce, social commerce, and what's next for fashion brands with regards to younger consumers. So I'm sure we'll have you both back on the podcast soon, and obviously a new list index on the way in a few months' time. Sarah, Sophie, it's been great to have you on the Good Growth podcast and to get your views, and looking forward to speaking to you both again soon.
Thank you, George.
Thanks, George.
Now, if you're a retailer or brand who has resonated with the challenges and opportunities we've mentioned, why not get in touch to see how we can help? We are Good Growth, the e-commerce consultants who turned digital failure into commercial success. You can email us at inquiries@goodgrowth.co.uk or have a look at our website, which is goodgrowth.co.uk. Thanks for listening.